Okay, video 2 for Tripartite Tractate. In video 1, we discussed the inception of the concept called the Father, followed by the second order called Christ, which is the Son, the only begotten Son of the Father, begotten, meaning that he was the first to have gnosis in the pleroma, so therefore being the first begotten Son of the Father or God. And then finally, the third order of the creation of God, which is the church. Some sects of Gnosticism and also proto-Orthodox Christians call this the Holy Spirit. These three were in the beginning with God. Catholics would consider this to be the Trinity, and they would consider these three being the Godhead. Now, in Gnosticism, most Gnostics during the time that the early Gnostic Church came about did not see God to be a Trinity or a Godhead, but rather the Father, Son, and Church, or the Holy Spirit, were essentially archetypes or concepts that emanated from the monad or the one God that had always been and is always. So that's the key difference. So let's pick up from where we left off on video 1, and where we left off was talking about the aeonic emanations in the pleroma, which is the fourth order. We understand the aeons embraced the first, second, and third orders of creation, which were again the concept of the Father, the concept of the Son who begets all that the God creates through the Father, and then finally the church that becomes the bride of the Christ and therefore marries and has offspring within the church, which are the sons and daughters of God through Christ. Then comes the aeons that follow in order that the aeons may embrace humanity. So the aeons are the beings that go about to secure God's will. You could think of it as being the hands and body of God that goes about and crafts with the hand creation and goes about and sets forth whatever God has in mind, being God is the head of all, or the monad. The aeons could be equivalent to, in the realm of the Kanoma, or the corrupt realm, or parallel to archons. And then the God of this world is the demiurge, also known as Jehovah, and many other names, the God of Muhammad, the God of the Jews, so forth and so on. And there are many different expressions. It's really Godheads that require sacrifice, obedience, as well as worship, and 100% total commitment to the point at which you do otherwise, that God would be jealous and may even be vengeful. So in this realm, this is the nature of God. It's the physical realm. And in the pleroma, you have the true Father, or the true God, which is eternal, is unaffected by mankind. And I'll bring this up because in order for you to get a more clear understanding of what an aeon is, or what the aeonic emanations or life is, we draw the parallel to the archons. Now, archons also can be considered the dichotomous expression of the demiurge, whereas the pleroma God has only one expression, and that is the aeons. And the aeons are the light source. They are pure in every way. There is no evil. There is no lack of God. They're full of God. They are from God. They emanate from God. Whereas in the Kanoma, ruled by the demiurge God, his hands that go about to make and create are the archons, and the archons are of dual nature, much in the way that everything is dual nature, so that archons can be either demons or angels. And in reality, there really is no difference between a demon and an angel. They really are one and the same. They are, in fact, by name, in the most accurate way, called archons. And that's from which we get the words such as archangel, for example. That archangel is really just an archon angel. And there are many different types of angels, such as seraphim. To understand the aeonic world, let's focus on what is in this part 5 of the Tripartite Tractate. And not only are we going to get into the fullness of the aeons, but we're also going to go into the longings of the aeons. Now, this is where much of the Orthodox Church differs from Gnosticism. The Orthodox Church will tell you that when you're perfect, if you go to heaven, for example, or Christ goes to heaven after he was sacrificed on the cross, then they go back completely devoid of any type of longing. In fact, everything is provided for them, and there is nothing else. It's completed, essentially, so that fullness equates to having no real mind of self. It is almost as though their understanding of God is one where God's mind is their mind and there is no independent thinking. And you must line up exactly to that understanding of God. In other words, there really is no distinction between the personality of God or identity, the Christ and the Holy Spirit, and all the beings that have been created by God, and the demiurge, or in the case of the proto-Orthodox Christians, they don't see their God as the demiurge. They, in fact, believe that's the God of everything. Now, in Gnosticism, there is no wrong or right about having a identity or disagreement to God the Father. As the God the Father is truth, truth in and of itself is its own judge. It speaks for itself. There's no need for the God the Father in the Pleroma to impress upon its creation to be exact duplicates of the Father. In fact, they're encouraged to have the liberty to be contrary to God the Father. In fact, that is the essence of creation. To say otherwise is to say there is no creation, but you have more like a cadaver that's empty and devoid of any real spirit, with no true personality, and would be an empty shell, hollow husk walking about with programmed mind think. In the realm of the Pleroma, that God encourages free thinking with the understanding that there is a universal truth that cannot be altered because it is the nature of everything. It's just the way it is. And this is the substance of everything. There's nothing necessarily judgmental about it. It is more that it is the essence of being. As we go along, it'll become more and more clear to you that error is merely, or sin is merely error from understanding, or lack of knowledge of understanding what that truth is. And the more you understand what that truth is, the more in alignment you will freely want to be with the God source, because you will understand that it will serve you to do so. But the difference is you come on your own account and of your own will, but in so doing, you also bring with you the unique features of your experience, which grows wisdom that adds to the Pleroma. It's not that the Pleroma is lacking that wisdom, but through you it is being. Therefore, it comes alive through you, you see. The concept, the archetype, is forever existing. It is alive, but the difference is that through you, it becomes animated. So that's where the difference is. And so that's what we have to understand about when we talk about what Orthodox Christians call the fall, which they condemn and they consider to be the most heinous and awful crime against God possible, that has resulted in a justifiable suffering onto humanity and all of the universe. In Gnosticism, we do not call that a fall. We call that a dissension. So you're not falling from something, but you are becoming less than you were in order that you may be filled with truth. And less in this case is not in the world where we live, especially in the capitalistic culture, where more is better and less is not good, but rather it's all good, because in so becoming nothing, you become the potential for everything. All that you could never have been had you not become nothing. So that's the way we have that understanding. So when one of the Aeons stands up contrary to God, what she does, and in this case, it's not really a she or he, because there's really no sex in the Pleroma as we think of it, not a physical sex, but rather that at the time that, again, these writers were inspired by God to write these truths, they understand women to be the weaker, mainly because it was from the Judeo understanding of God at the time. The Old Testament dominated in the Middle East at the time, and women were, of course, through Eve, who was the one who took of the forbidden fruit, was the weaker one, and man was the stronger one. And that's the way it was understood, and therefore anything that was weak was labeled as a she, and anything that was strong was generally labeled as a he. So I'm going to be using she, even though this writer sometimes does use he, and we'll explain why. But when we get into part 5, the Aeonic life, you're going to understand that what's being referred to here is what's called Sophia. And Sophia is the name of whose archetype is called wisdom. So this is where we get the word philosophia. It's the love of, philo or filio, or the love of wisdom, philosophy. Sophia is the name of this particular aeon whose emanation or archetype or aeonic expression is called wisdom. Now, when you think about aeons, you must think of them as concepts. They are the tools by which everything is created. Think of it as the parts of a recipe. So they're the ingredients. So each one of the aeons have their own particular, they are an ingredient, maybe an egg, flour, sugar, so forth and so on. So the aeons are the ingredients of creation. Now, they are made up of pure light. They have no physical form. They have a body that they emanate to be relatable, and that body is always mutable to their liking based upon how they want to express themselves or be relatable to those outside themselves. And even then, they're not truly outside themselves, as they're all unified. But again, they're in one pot making a recipe that whatever the God is willing to make, in this case, the recipe is the human experience. That's the way we understand aeons. And when Sophia comes to God, totality, the infinite truth, she comes to ask a question, comes into her mind, and we're going to get into that here. And that's the beginning of everything. You think about, even in life, nothing gets made or created, a new technology, a new experience, unless we have some type of question in our mind or curiosity in our mind. Now, I want to make it very sharply clear that there's a difference between a curiosity, a craftiness, and an urge. Longing is somewhere between an urge and a question that one may have, a curiosity. In the realm of the pleroma, curiosities are encouraged, and there is nothing that is not about that is not of God, that is not separate from God or empty of God. But a longing is now in the gray area. Sophia brings about a longing, and much in the same way that if you, let's say you have a mad scientist that has a question, well, that's good. And if they take a healthy approach to doing their lab research in the basement, so forth and so on, that's healthy and that's good. But if they're starting to get attached is the key here, and they take on a longing and they want to get this done, and they're spending abundance of hours, so forth and so on, that becomes unhealthy. And this is where Sophia went. You must understand this was in her nature to go there, because how else could she experience and grow the nature of her being? And in this case, her archetype was wisdom. Wisdom can only be had through experience. And so it was only she, of all the aeons, that would have been most inclined to take this path. Let's go ahead and get started. This is section 5, part 1. It says, all those who came forth from him, who are the aeons of the aeons, being emanations and offspring of his procreative nature, they too, in their procreative nature, have given glory to the Father, as he was the cause of their establishment. And again, as I said in the last video, when we talk about glory, glorifying God, the difference between the Orthodox Christian and the Gnostic Christian, Proto-Orthodox Christian would say that you are required to glorify God through worship. So it's an active process that you have to participate in and generate, much like earning or creating a coin and then offering it to God, and then God takes pleasure in that. But in Gnosticism, there's no need for that, because the glory is in that what has been created is glorious and speaks for itself. So there's no need. It's in silence. It is glorious. That's what's being referred to here when it says glory to the Father, as he was the cause of their establishment. This is what we have said previously, namely that he creates the aeons as roots and springs and fathers, and that he is the one to whom they give glory. Now, what's being said here, like I said before, is each one of us are a seed, and Christ is much like the sun, and Sophia is like the rain, and the aeons are the soil, and we reach for the aeons. We reach for our archetypes to have our experiences, to take our sustenance, our nutrients, and that then grows us to reach for the sky, or reach for Christ and the wisdom, and that grows us toward the pleroma. They have begotten, for he has knowledge and wisdom, and the totalities knew that it is from knowledge and wisdom that they have come forth. Growing in is knowledge and wisdom. Now here's where it's introducing the cohort known as the Gnosis, which is knowledge and wisdom, and knowledge being Logos and wisdom being Sophia. Now, Logos is the Father, Christ, and church aspect. Sophia is the part of the archetype of wisdom. The other thing we want to understand is in knowledge, there's faith. And faith is the archetype known as the Christ. And we'll get to that here later. But the reason why these two are brought together, knowledge and wisdom, and being mentioned always together, is that they are a consort, meaning that they are eternally a complementary unit that work together in unison as one unit. So knowledge and wisdom are always together. You cannot have one without the other. But knowledge is from the Gnostic experience, not simply knowing something like 1 + 1 = 2, but it's from the experiential level. And then by having that knowledge, you then gain wisdom, and vice versa. When you go out and experience wisdom, then you grow knowledge. But the way in which you go about to seek an understanding of the universe is through knowledge and wisdom. And you go about doing them in different ways. If you do it this way, it's wisdom. If you do it that way, it's knowledge. So they have brought forth a seeming honor. Quote, "The Father is the one who is the totalities," unquote. If the aeons had risen up to give honor individually, therefore, in the song of glorification and in the power of the unity of Him from whom they have come, they were drawn into a mingling and a combination and in a unity with one another. It's just explaining the concept of the eternal consort. They offered glory worthy of the Father from the plurimatic congregation, which is a single representation, although many, because it was brought forth as a glory for the single one, and because they come forth toward the one who is himself the totalities. This was a praise, the one who brought forth the totalities, being a first fruit of the immortals, an eternal one, because having come forth from the living aeons, being perfect and full because of the one who is perfect and full. It left full and perfect those who have given glory in a perfect way because of the fellowship. For like the faultless Father, when he is glorified, he also hears the glory which glorifies him, so as to make them manifest as that which he is. Again, this is just expressing what I've been saying time and time again. Because God is already glorious, whatever God creates, it also is glorious. It's just reinforcing this notion to make it very clear of how this differs from the proto-Orthodox understanding of there's no need to say God is worthy of this or that, because it just simply is that God is glorious, so therefore there's no need to receive glory from anyone. So it's just simply a state of being, glorious. The cause of the second honor, which accrued to them, is that which was returned to them from the Father when they had known the grace by which they bore fruit with one another because of the Father. And again, the second honor is Christ. As a result, just as they were brought forth in glory for the Father, so too in order to appear perfect, they appeared acting by giving glory. Essentially, again, if you can think of God and Christ and everybody having the light in them, that light is giving off light, right? It's giving off light, so they're giving off glory. They were fathers of the third glory, and this is the church or the Holy Spirit, according to the independence and the power which was begotten with them, since each one of them individually does not exist so as to give glory in a unitary way to him whom he loves. They are the first and the second, and thus both of them are perfect and full, for they are manifestations of the Father who is perfect and full, as well as those who came forth, who are perfect by the fact that they glorify the perfect one, reinforcing that everything is created perfectly, and therefore is glorified by its nature. The fruit of the third, however, consists of honors of the will of each one of the aeons and each one of the properties. The Father has power, and exists fully perfect in the thought which is a product of agreement. Since it is a product of the individuality of the aeons, it is this which he loves and over which he has power. Now, notice what's being said here. The Father, or God, loves that each one of the aeons have their own individual nature. So, since it is a product of the individuality of the aeons, it is this which he loves and over which he has power, as it gives glory to the Father by means of it. God is getting glory from the fact that they have their own identities. For this reason, they are minds of minds. So they have their own minds, but yet they are of the unified mind of God. So they're in unison, basically. They're in agreement, which are found to be words of words, elders of elders, degrees of degrees, which are exalted above one another. What's exalted above the aeons is the unifying truth that they all share. That is the great cause. Whether your identity is this, or that, there's no competition because they all serve the same purpose in their glory. Each one of those who give glory has his place, and his exaltation, and his dwelling, and his rest, which consists of the glory which he brings forth. All those who glorify the Father have their begetting eternally. They beget in the act of assisting one another, since the emanations are limitless and immeasurable, and since there is no envy on the part of the Father toward those who came forth from him in regard to their begetting something equal or similar to him, since he is the one who exists in the totalities. So see, there's no jealousy here. And God lifts up the aeons to the level equal to God, because they are of God, you see. Can one truly say that the hand is less worthy than the nose, for example? No, you cannot. It's all necessary as a whole. Begetting and revealing himself whomever he wishes, he makes into a father, of whom he in fact is father. So he's essentially saying he's making whatever he creates, he makes it equal to itself, because it's just the emanating part of God issuing forth, and a God of whom he is in fact God. And he makes them the totalities, whose entirety he is. In the proper sense, all the names which are great are kept there. These names, which the angels share, who have come into being in the cosmos along with the archons, although they do not have any resemblance to the eternal beings, meaning those names, those archetypes, are in the pleroma, and they're by name, Sophia, faith, so forth and so on. But they have their own names, Sophia being wisdom, Christ being faith, the Logos, and their various different names. Those names exist in the pleroma as archetypes. That's what you have to understand. They are now being brought into the cosmos here. Even if the Kanoma, or this cosmos, is a realm of corruption, the light within it is emanated from and through the material realm, from the pleroma. The entire system, the aeons, has a love and a longing for the perfect, complete discovery of the Father, and this is their unimpeded agreement. Though the Father reveals himself eternally, he did not wish that they should know him, since he grants that he be conceived of in such a way as to be sought for, while keeping to himself his unsearchable primordial being. This is purposely set up so that the mystery is kept sacred, and also places within all of God's beings the capacity to bring about their own individuality by seeking out knowledge and understanding of God in every being's unique way. It is he, the Father, who gave root impulses to the aeons, since they are places on the path which leads toward him, as toward a school of behavior. It is through the aeons that we find God, you see, the true Father, and one of them being Sophia and the other being Christ. And you cannot in any way suggest that Sophia, who was the first inquisitor, is somehow less than Christ. You must only look at them as having their own unique expression or individuality in their own ways. You see, that's all. He has extended to them faith in and prayer to him whom they do not see, and a firm hope in him of whom they do not conceive, and a fruitful love which looks toward that which it does not see, and an acceptable understanding of the eternal mind, and a blessing which is riches and freedom, and a wisdom of the one who desires the glory of the Father for his thought. It is by virtue of his will that the Father, the one who is exalted, is known, that is, by virtue of the Spirit which breathes in the totalities and gives them an idea of seeking after the unknown one, just as one is drawn by a pleasant aroma to search for the thing from which the aroma arises, since the aroma of the Father surpasses these ordinary ones. So whatever you may try to find ultimately in your life, an understanding of the cosmos, science, psychology, whatever the various fields of logic may be, they will never be ultimately fulfilling or satisfying, because in the end they all lead back to God and wanting to know God. And that's the story of Star Trek. I think it was Star Trek Voyager, that they wanted to find God. And of course, in that story, God was made by man and was a Voyager, the original Voyager that was sent out and gained knowledge, and through knowledge it became as a god, or thought it was a god. That's the urging, or boldly going forth where no man goes. That curiosity, that desire for knowledge, or that seeking for knowledge, and it's not a longing but a seeking for knowledge, that is what is put in all of us, because it brings us back to the ultimate, which is the totalities which is God. For sweetness leaves the aeons in ineffable pleasure, and it gives them their idea of mingling with him who wants them to know him in a united way and to assist one another in the spirit which is sown within them. And that's the unified way of the truth, or the mystery of the truth, that they are unified to find together, and they work together to achieve that, because only working together can they continually grow the experience of God as intended from the beginning. Through God's will and through themselves, their individual selves, they have that experience and have it in glory. Though existing under a great weight, they are renewed in expressible way, since it is impossible for them to be separated from that in which they are set in an uncomprehending way, because they will not speak, being silent about the Father's glory, about the one who has power to speak, yet they will take form from him, who revealed himself, though it is impossible to speak of him. They have him hidden in a thought, since from this one they are silent about the way the Father is in his form and his nature and his greatness, while the aeons have become worthy of knowing through his Spirit that he is unnameable and incomprehensible. It is through his Spirit, which is the trace of the search for him, that he provides them the ability to conceive of him, to speak about him. Now this is important as a groundwork to what's going to follow, in that accepting the mystery of not ever completely comprehending the Father is what allows one room to grow, eternally grow toward the Father, and gain wisdom, knowledge, and individuality. If you wanted to go to the end of the line and know God fully, then that would be a type of death, you see, because there would no place to grow beyond, which wouldn't be possible anyway, but this is what's being suggested here. Each one of the aeons is a name, that is, each of the properties and powers of the Father, since he exists in many names, which are intermingled and harmonious with one another. It is possible to speak of him because of the wealth of speech, just as the Father is a single name, because he is a unity, yet is innumerable in his properties and names. The emanation of the totalities, which exists from the one who exists, did not occur according to a separation from one another, as something cast off from the one who begets them. Rather, their begetting is like a process of extension, as the Father extends himself to those whom he loves, so that those who have come forth from him might become him as well. Now, this would be considered blasphemous in Orthodox Christianity. No way could you possibly consider that your purpose is to become as God, and that you are therefore called sons and daughters of God. As Christ said, "Haven't I told you, ye are gods?" And rightfully so, because that's the intention of the demiurge, is to keep you perpetually believing that you're nothing but an insignificant, wretched human that is the cause of all suffering, death, and mayhem in the universe, simply because someone you didn't know several thousands of years ago partook of the tree of knowledge that you had no control over. That's what the demiurge has trapped millions of billions of people on this earth into believing, so that they will never understand and walk and grope in the dark and be shrouded from the truth and the essence of their potential. So that the understanding is that we are an extension of God, therefore we are potentials of God, or is what I called little Christinos or Christinas becoming. Just as the present aeon, though a unity, is divided by units of time, and units of time are divided into years, and years are divided into seasons, and seasons into months, and months into days, and days into hours, and hours into moments, so to the aeon of the truth, since it is a unity and multiplicity, receives honor in the small and the great names according to the power of each to grasp it. So what's being said here is there is the definition of time, and time is not a measure of numbers, but rather time is a measure of individuality, and having those individual experiences is what passes time. By way of analogy, like a spring, which is what it is, it flows into streams and lakes and canals and branches. So it's the passing of a stream of experience that is time. But the demiurge has captivated time through bondage, and that is why we use numbers to section off experiences, or essentially divide them into small units, so that we can never have the full experience of everyone being unified. And that's what's been done through Kronos, which is Saturnus or Saturn, also known as the demiurge. Or like a root spread out beneath trees and branches with its fruit, or like a human body which is partitioned into an indivisible way into members of members, primary members and secondary, great and small. So in the realm of the corrupt, led by the demiurge, we have been taught that time is essence and is ticking away. In other words, our individuality is ticking away. It's being bled from us day by day and day by day. And that we've been made to believe that that captivation, that imprisonment, that bondage of the minutes and seconds clicking away, tick, 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 ever reminding you subconsciously that death is imminent, that bondage is slicing away at your individuality. And until you can find the fullness of your purpose and your who you are, which is a son and daughter of God, eternal, then you have accepted into that law of attraction of understanding, which is that you are mortal and that you're captivated by tick, 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 tick. And that's what time is, and that's what you accept. Section 6, the last section in this video, the imperfect begetting by the Logos. The aeons have brought themselves forth in accord with the third fruit, by the freedom of the will and by wisdom with which he favored them for their thought. Third fruit again being they were brought forth in accord, they were in unity of purpose, so that they would be part of cultivating or providing the nutrients in the root system, in the soil, to the third fruit, which is the church or the body. You can consider them as being our nursery mothers and nursery fathers. They're the babysitters almost. They're the ones that nurture us and helped grow us as little gods. That's what's being said here. They do not wish to give honor with that which is from an agreement, though it was produced for words of praise for each of the pleromas. So this is something that they wanted to do. There's no malice, whereas the angels under the archon are jealous of humans who started out less than the angels, but will in time supersede the angels. Those archons, they're jealous, you see. But with the aeons, there is no jealousy because they trust the whole experience for what it is and they know their place. And everyone, when they fully accept who they are, then they are at peace, you see. And so we'll get to understand what incentive. There's an incentive for them as well. They will get something from this as well. It's not all about humans only. Nor do they wish to give honor with the totality, nor do they wish to do so with anyone else who was originally above the depth of that one or above his place, except, however, for the one who exists in an exalted name and in the exalted place, and only if he receives from the one who wished to give honor and takes it from himself for the one above him and only begets himself, so to speak himself, and through the one begets himself along with that which he is, and himself becomes renewed along with the one who came upon him by his brother, and sees him and entreats him about the matter, namely, he who wished to ascend him. In other words, only that one, which is the demiurge, so that it might be in his way. The one who wished to give honor does not say anything to him about this, except only that there is a limit to speech set in the pleroma, so that they are silent about the incomprehensibility of the Father, but they speak about the one who wishes to comprehend him. Earlier I discussed how the unutterable name of God was part of what allows for that infinite, eternal growing of gnosis and experience, knowledge and wisdom. If you're going to take a top and you try to close it off because you want to capture the fullness and take it with you, then you have closed off the potential for there to be eternal knowledge and growth, you see, and experience, and gaining your own individuality. God will always have to be eternally ahead of us and a mystery, so that we're always seeking. And just when we think we fully understand God, then there's more to know. In other words, that's what allows us to forever grow in our experience, knowledge, wisdom, gnosis. Along comes one of the aeons who found that to be curious and wanted to capture the fullness of God in a jar, put a top on it, and run away with it. Because that Sophia was wisdom. So she wanted the fullness of her experience to gain full wisdom. So she wanted to captivate the full understanding of God. And this is where it all starts. By so doing that, she was essentially asking God, I want to fully comprehend you, the incomprehensible. And if Sophia, or one of the angels, had approached the demiurge in the way in which Sophia approached the true Father in the pleroma, then the demiurge would probably instantly destroy that angel, because that's the nature of that God, you see. Now, the nature of the Father God is one where he allowed this. He says, okay, this is what you want, then let's have it. And this is where the first introduction of longing came in. She longed for that. She became obsessed with it. She could not be satisfied with the fullness of everything that had been given to her already. There's no weakness in this. There's no wrong in this. This was her nature. She's wisdom. She wanted more than just knowledge. She wanted to actually experience God fully. So you have to understand this so that you don't go down that path because of your upbringing, that you want to categorize this as either good or bad, evil or light. It's not like that. In the pleroma, there's only light. Creation is perfectly set forth. There's no error in creation. The Father only allows. So this is where it starts. So it came to one of the Aeons that he should attempt to grasp the incomprehensibility and give glory to it. And so the key here is, and to give it glory. Why give glory to something that's already fully glorious? It's not needed. She didn't do this out of jealousy for the Father. She didn't do this out of envy. She did this out of love for the Father. Much in the way that, let's say you have great love for something you want to fully understand or know. Maybe you're into computers or you're into some kind of biology and you want to know the depths of it. You're so in love with that topic matter that you want to fully embrace it. Or another good example might be, let's say somebody wanted to really know sharks, for example. And so what do? They go into the water and they take the risks swimming among the sharks. So this is what it was like for her. She loved God to that point. And if you take knowledge and you combine it with a little bit of love, you get wisdom. So this is what's being said here. So she wanted to comprehend, which is knowledge, and she wanted to give glory, which is out of her love. And these two is what brings forth wisdom, you see. And to it, and especially to the ineffability of the Father. So she wanted to understand God and to love God fully. Also to completely experience the ineffable, which means completely experience the mystery of what makes God what God is. Since he is a logos, and this is where it interchanges he and she, because again, they are a consort. They work together. But she was doing this without her consort knowing. So she, in fact, went about doing this separate from Christo or Christ, which is faith. So you have to understand that she lost faith, in other words, to completely have faith in the creation just as it is and trust that it will invariably take her to understand God eternally more and more and more. But no, she wanted to take it, its fullness, put it in a jar and put a top on it, okay? But she did it separate from Logos, which is the Christ. And Logos is also known as faith. Because they are one and the same, you will find that the Gnostic writers would sometimes use Sophia, sometimes use Logos, but what they mean to say, Logos is Sophia that had this experience separate from the Christ or faith. That's Logos. People who are logically minded typically don't have faith, you see. That's where we get logic. Since he is a Logos of the unity, he is the one, though he is not from the agreement of the totalities. Unbeknownst to him, Christ, he was not agreeing with this, what Sophia was doing, nor from him who brought them forth, namely the one who brought forth the totality of the Father. Even though Sophia was the one that was doing this without the Christo or Christ, because they are a consort, they're jointly responsible. Now, responsibility is not in the sense that the demiurge would interpret responsibility, which is, okay, now you'll be punished. But responsibility is merely God is going to respond to the unity of the consort known as Gnosis, which is made up of wisdom and knowledge, or Sophia and Christ. That's what's being said here. This Aeon was among those to whom was given wisdom, so that he could become pre-existent in each one's thought. Here you have to understand again, it will be interchanging he and she because the consort is made up of Christ the he and Sophia the she. By that which he wills will they be produced. And again, it's also referring to God, which is the totality. And because they are emanations of God, it can get confusing very quickly. He represents everything, the experience that God intended. Therefore, he received a wise nature in order to examine the hidden basis, since he is a wise fruit. For the free will, which was begotten with the totalities, was a cause for this one, such as to make him do what he desired, with no one to restrain him. God already knew this was going to happen, and in fact set it forth this way from the beginning, to set within Sophia a longing, and was unrestrained in doing this, and therefore was not to be judged harshly in any way, not that even harshness is from God at all, but it's from the demiurge. The intent then of the Logos, who is this one, was good. So the intention was good because it was founded in love and desire for comprehension, standing of the ineffable, or experience of the ineffable, which is the great mystery. When he had come forth, he gave glory to the Father, even if it led to something beyond possibility, because the truth of the matter is, this was an illusion. Because Sophia would only be able to understand God to a point. Because even if she attempted to put God in a jar in God's fullness and top it off, God is forever emanating. And so she could only bottle it at that moment in time. But as she's experiencing it, God is expanding, so she's always chasing it anyway. So she created an illusion. But nonetheless, as you'll see, she and everything else to follow is the more for it. Since he had wanted to bring forth one who is perfect from an agreement which he had not seen, and without having the command. So he wanted this all to happen. He did not want, God that is, didn't want to command, you go do this, you go do that. That's the workings of the demiurge, who goes about and makes laws and commands you do that, else I'll strike you down or you go to hell. That's not the nature of God. God sets us forth within the possibility of being, and therefore our natures will gravitate in this direction. It's not destined in that direction, but it is nature of Sophia to be this way, to be curious. She's wisdom. This Aeon was last to have been brought forth by mutual assistance, and he was small in magnitude. Now, the other thing, when we're talking about he, we're not only talking about Christ, but we're talking about God, and we're also talking about the demiurge. Now, what you have to understand is that concepts are not like human beings in the material world, where we have this illusion of separateness. Okay, so you're Joe, and you're Mary, and you're Jackie, and so forth and so on. You're different people, and you may all come together and do something together with purpose, like rob a bank, for example, and you're all held responsible for robbing a bank, but each one of you are doing it in your own way. But what you have to understand, that unity of purpose is the Aeon expression of what the three of you are doing. So the Sophia, with or without her concert, knowing or being agreeable to what she's doing, what she did, the Aeon of Christ is still doing it because they're a consort, and they can't be separated from what the other's doing. They're complementary. In addition to that, because she is the concept of wisdom, and she set into motion bottling God in a jar, she then also created a God. But that God was limited by what was in the jar, you see. So she was only able to take a part of the true Father. But because it was not the fullness of the true Father, it had within it both truth and a lie. That's where you get the duality that we have in this realm. And that's what's being said here. So that's why when it talks about he, it gets confusing very fast if you can't appreciate what's being said here fully. It seems like it's jumping all around and you're not quite sure, why is it saying he did this and he did that? And I'm really confused. Is it talking about Christ? Is it talking about the Sophia? Is it talking about God the Father? Is it talking about the demiurge? It's talking about all of them. Again, these are experiences that are what is the embodiment or the body of these beings called aeons. They don't take on flesh bodies. They take on experiential bodies. And whatever they're experiencing, they are multiplicity of different entities or beings, you see, all at once. So she's in one, the Father God. She's in one, Christ. She's in one, herself, Sophia, and she's also the demiurge because she's an expression of what her intention is, you see. That's what's being said. So it gets confusing. So that's when we use the word he and she interchangeably, and it jumps around between different characteristics of her being. And before he begot anything else for the glory of the will and agreement with the totalities, he acted magnanimously from an abundance of love and set out toward that which surrounds the perfect glory, for it was not without the will of the Father that the Logos was produced, which is to say, not without it will he go forth, but he, the Father, had brought him forth for those about whom he knew that it was fitting that they should come into being. The Father and totalities drew away from him, so that the limit which the Father had set might be established. God the Father allowed this process to take shape. Sophia wanted to experience what is it like to be God fully. What is it like to experience the mystery of God, the ineffable experience? Well, the answer is, in the beginning, God was. Before everything was, God was. And so that made God utterly alone. And all the other creations of God could not experience being utterly alone, because when they were created, God already was. So that's why God removed himself from humanity and from Sophia and Christ. And that's when Christ says upon the cross, God, God, have you abandoned me? That isn't Christ being somehow losing faith in God, but making a statement and making a question. Have I finished my work? Have I now experienced utterly being abandoned from you? Because at that moment that I can experience that, then I'm finished. I finished my task. You see, Sophia and the Christ are one entity, known as the Gnosis, which is the Logos, which is the Christos, which is Sophia, which is wisdom, which is knowledge, which is all those things in one. That experience of awareness, you see, that's the Gnosis, the Aeon, the Gnosis consort. And so when Christ finally understood that he was completely and utterly abandoned by God the Father, that's the moment he knew his mission was done. And he was able to experience the ineffable experience, the mystery of what it was like for God before God created everything. And that's why then he followed it up by saying, "It is finished." Okay, let's go on. For it is not from grasping the incomprehensibility, but by the will of the Father. And furthermore, they withdrew so that the things which have come to be might become an organization which would come into being. God did this so that everyone can have a humanity of experience together, of feeling utterly alone, but in that finding compassion and love for one another, bonding with one another. If it were to come, it would not come into being by the manifestation of the pleroma. In other words, God's not going to do this, but it's humanity that's going to do this. It's going to be Sophia that starts it, freely doing so. Therefore, it is not fitting to criticize the movement which is the Logos, but it is fitting that we should say about the movement of the Logos that it is a cause of an organization which has been destined to come about. So again, in Orthodox Christianity, they would make it into a fall, and that it's horrible and it's wretched and it should not have happened, and that we should stay away from the tree of life, if you can imagine that, of eternal life. And we should stay away from knowledge, if you can imagine that. The two things that are our essence of being. That is what is immortality. That is our essence called Godship. That's what makes us immortal, that knowledge of good and evil and access to eternal life. But that was stolen from us in the garden, you see. So let's continue. The Logos himself caused it to happen, being complete and unitary. Now, it didn't say God, it said Logos. Now remember, Logos is Christ without faith, but the Christ lost the faith not by the Christ action, through the unitary action of Sophia taking the action, but because their consort, Christ, which is faith and gnosis, became Logos and had to go back to get its faith, you see, on earth, to bring with it faith and to restore the Logos back to its rightful position. The Logos himself caused it to happen, being complete and unitary, for the glory of the Father. So Christ is the one that did it. Father only allowed it. Whom he desired. And here's where the word longing and desire come in, because that comes from that understanding of the word urge, you see. In this realm we have an urge, not a curiosity, not a seeking, but a longing and a desire. And he did so, being content with it. But those whom he wished to take hold of firmly, he begat in shadows and copies and likenesses. And again, now this is where it's bringing in that part of Sophia known as the demiurge and its nature. For he was not able to bear the sight of the light, but he looked into the depth and he doubted. And this is the opposite of faith, which is doubt. So therefore, Logos. So that's why you have in the beginning was the Word, because it's through the Word it creates the pathway by which the light can siphon through, and this light being the faith can then enter into the world. You could think of it as being the conduit that allows faith to come back or enter back into this realm. It lost when Sophia questioned the Father and the ineffable experience. That's how wisdom is brought about. Out of this there was division. He became deeply troubled, and a turning away because of his self-doubt and division, forgetfulness and ignorance of himself and of that which is. His self-exaltation and his expectation of comprehending the incomprehensible became firm for him and was in him. But the sicknesses followed him when he went beyond himself, having come into being from self-doubt, namely from the fact that he did not reach the attainment of the glories of the Father. The one who exalted status is among things unlimited. This one did not attain him, for he did not receive him. He can only receive God, the true Father, through gnosis, which is, again, knowledge, wisdom, and faith. Those three must come together, and then you can be open to receiving the Father. But without the Father, you cannot have the fullness of the light. You can only have a part of God, but even that part dissipates through time. That's why the universe will slowly die, you see, and everyone is slowly dying, because this realm doesn't contain the fullness. It only contains the part of God Sophia put in a jar. And even that small part is billions of years old and is sustaining this entire corrupt realm, the flesh realm and the corrupt realm. That's how powerful the essence of God is, you see. Just a small part of God is sustaining this realm. That's why there is good in this realm, but there's also evil. The one whom he himself brought forth as a unitary aeon rushed up to that which is his, and this kin of his in the pleroma abandoned him when came to be in the defect along with those who had come forth from him in an imaginary way, since they are not his. So the key word here is rushed. So Sophia, because she's wisdom and she has a natural curiosity, was rushing. She wanted to know this now. I want to know it now. I want to know this mystery now, because she was so in love with the Father. She couldn't wait. She was so eager. And she rushed, and that rushing resulted in this ram. When he who produced himself as perfect actually did bring himself forth, he became weak like a female nature which has abandoned its virile counterpart, impregnated herself with this light of God without her counterpart. She brought about a pregnancy. That pregnancy was the demiurge, and she attempted to abort him, but because he carried with him the light of God, he remained alive, but was cast into darkness. Not that the Father cast him into darkness, but rather that the nature of being is that it would result in him being in darkness, because he had ignorance. He didn't have gnosis, because he was only logically minded, and he couldn't have any faith. He had no faith. He had doubt. So from his standpoint, because he was the only one in darkness, he looked around. He presumed he was God. That's where it all starts, you see. And that's the 0 point by which humanity crawls its way back and finds its individuality back to the pleroma and gathers itself. Everyone has their unique story toward that, the prodigal son. From that which was deficient in itself, there came those things which came into being from his thought and his arrogance. But from that which is perfect in him, he left it, and raised himself up to those who are his. He was in the pleroma as a remembrance for him, so that he would be saved from his arrogance. It's very difficult for people to actually understand they're in two places at once, because the demiurge has made you believe that heaven or God is somewhere trillions of light years away, and the pleroma is somewhere beyond this physical realm, when in fact it is here now. You are carrying the pleroma within you, and you're also carrying the body of ignorance, the darkness, the body, the physical flesh body. So that's what is bringing forth the dual nature of the demiurge. From that which was deficient in itself, there came those things which came into being from his thought and his arrogance. And that ignorance is what creates the material realm. But from that which is perfect in him, he left it and raised himself up to those who are his. He was in the pleroma, so his light that is within him is the pleroma. The light within each of us is the pleroma. It is in everything. The pleroma is everywhere. But some know it more than others, you see. And it becomes more manifested the more gnosis you have, as in a remembrance for him, so that he would be saved from his arrogance. Even the demiurge is given grace, has grace actually, I should say. If we have the light, that light, because it's of God, is infallible. It will find a way to heal everything from within out. The one who ran on high, and the one who drew him to himself, who were not barren, but in bringing forth a fruit in the pleroma, they upset those who were in the defect. So it's saying here that those that are ignorant and are in darkness do not want this flesh world to come to an end, because they want to maintain their godship over it, because that's what they understood themselves to be. Because that's what Sophia set out to be, right? She set out from the beginning to experience being God. And that's what, through her, came about the demiurge, who is living that out through her to be a God. But because it's not the fullness of God, but rather a part of God, it's not a perfect experience of God, because that's an illusion. That can never be. And bringing forth a fruit in the pleroma, they upset those who were in the defect. So this is why you have wars and suffering and propaganda, to perpetually keep us in darkness, to keep us in bondage, because they were upset by this, that this would come to an end. Like the pleromas are the things which came into being from the arrogant thought, which are their pleromas likenesses, copy shadows and phantasms, lacking reason and the light, these which belong to the vain thoughts, since they are not products of anything. Therefore, their end will be like their beginning. From that which did not exist they are, to return once again to that which will not be. So even though Sophia may want to experience the fullness of the ineffable, God will allow her to have the experience that she has the illusion of desiring, but in reality she could never fully understand the ineffable, which is the great mystery and forever will be the great mystery. But the wonderful thing of it is that we are always growing in that mystery through gnosis, and that's what allows us our will, you see, and our individuality. It says that in the end that will pass away. Her curiosity will dissipate when she settles, but that will be done through the demiurge and through humanity. We will understand in the end we already are God, so there's no need for us to experience being God. And it's the mystery within us that allows us to grow. If you take away the mystery, there's no room to grow anymore, you see, so that becomes a death. It is they, however, by themselves who are greater, more powerful, and more honored than the names which are given to them which are their shadows. In the manner of a reflection are they beautiful, for the face of the copy normally takes its beauty from that of which it is a copy. So even though Sophia said about doing this, and even though the demiurge is very cruel, spills blood and murder and mayhem, in the end, the light will supersede that because God is all-powerful. Now, again, I want to remind you that does not therefore mean that what you do today, and this is the argument that Paul said, are you saying that I should just sin and do whatever I want? Of course it matters. Absolutely matters. It matters because the word matters is the physical matter. We're going to experience it through you reap what you sow in this realm. And everything that you're doing to attach onto those experiences is what will keep you in this realm, because that's what you will, and that's what the Father allows, what you will. So you'll have to suffer, because this is the realm of suffering. They thought of themselves that they are beings existing by themselves and are without a source, since they do not see anything else existing before them, just as God had nothing before him when God existed before God's emanation of creation. Therefore, they lived in disobedience and acts of rebellion without having humbled themselves before the one because of whom they came into being. Now notice, this is very, very vital for you to understand this. They're not being disobedient and having acts of rebellion toward God. It doesn't say that. But they lived in disobedience and acts of rebellion. That's very, very different. Meaning, in other words, they were being disobedient and rebellious toward one another. They couldn't humble themselves to one another. Before the one because of whom came into being, they wanted to command one another, you see, overcoming one another in their vain ambition, while the glory which they possess contains a cause of the system which was to be, but they couldn't recognize it. Everything they wanted was already inside them, but they were looking outside. They are likenesses of the things which are exalted. They were brought to a lust for power in each one of them, according to the greatness of the name of which each is a shadow, each one imagining that it is superior to its fellows. So imagining is the key word. They just believed that somehow if I gain enough money or if I have a big enough house or car, then I'll have power and I'll be better than someone else, you see. The thought of these others was not barren, but just like those of which they are shadows. All that they thought about they have as potential sons. So whatever we choose, whatever we attach ourselves on to, we are begetting our creation for our next incarnation and our own realm here. It's the archetypes that we're creating that matter, not the physical things, not the material things that we think we're making. Those don't matter. It's the concepts, the creative force, the intentions, the motivations that bring about the essence of what's most important. Those of whom they thought they had as offspring. Therefore, it happened that many offspring came forth from them, as fighters, as warriors, as troublemakers, as apostates. Keep asking yourself, why are there all these people that are warmongers or troublemakers and hurting one another and murdering one another and being hateful? Well, because of the sins of the father, as they say. Whatever you're doing today, you are influencing, you are affecting the world around you, and you're setting forth, you reap what you sow into action. It's not going away. You can trick yourself into thinking that what you do here does not matter, but it does matter because you are matter. and you do matter, and therefore whatever you're doing will have its result. They are disobedient beings, lovers of power. All the other beings of the sort were brought forth from these. And that's where it closes here on section 6. It gives you the understanding of why there's so much mayhem, suffering, and troublemaking, and war, and horror here on this planet. Now you understand where it all came about and where it all derives from, which it derives from the ignorance of knowing one's original glory and one's original state of being in a sleep, and much like the Matrix, going about thinking that the illusory world is the real world, and attaching onto that. And that's what leads to the terror and fear that we talked about in the last couple of books that's being implied here. Blessed day.